All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, reading our 2025 SEC College Football predictions. We went ahead and broke down every single team individually in prior videos. So if you'd like to see that, those are on our channel. We're going to start here with some awards, look at our all-conference team, and then, of course, we're going to touch on the standings with our playoff predictions for this conference. Getting things started, we both had very similar ideas when it comes to Conference Player of the Year. Garrett Nussmeier, Anthony Hill, I think, are overwhelming favorites. Coach of the Year, Hugh Freeze for me, Billy Napier for Nick. We both think Florida's going to do quite well this year, so that'll probably end up being the best selection for that category. And when it comes to Breakout Player of the Year, for me, I went with Caden Lee. I think he's going to command a lot of targets in that offense. He was a pretty splendid option for Jackson Dart last year, and I think Austin Simmons is certainly going to make him their number one target out of the slot. Ray Hubbard from Alabama at safety. I thought he was tremendous for them the back half of the year. Plays with a lot of intensity, can force some turnovers. I think he's certainly going to be a nice, viable option. Newcomer of the Year, I picked one via transfer. Nick picked one via being a true freshman. John Mateer obviously is an easy choice. For you, Nick, you have two guys named Wilson, no relation. Wilson comes over from Georgia to Missouri. And then Dallas Wilson, that freshman receiver for Florida, who had a great spring practice for the Gators. Obviously, varying picks from what I have here. Just a little bit, Caden Durham. Can you consider him a breakout player? I would still think so, because if LSU has a season that we expect him to, he's probably going to have about 1,600 yards. And then, of course, we both went with Oklahoma as the biggest sleeper. We'll touch on them a little bit later. What are the highlights here, Nick, at least from you?
So I look at this and I think Caden Durham, people may say that's a controversial pick to put him as a breakout player because it might be, maybe you won't consider him a breakout player, but I think this is a guy that's really going to turn himself into one of the best backs in the SEC, if not the best back in the SEC by the time the season's done. I was really impressed with the back last year, 5'9", 205, was really solid. He had 750 yards on 6 carries. I think he can easily double that number this year in terms of yards and touchdowns this year. I think he can easily get to the 15, 16, 1,700 yards and then into the 12 to 15 touchdowns this year. I think he's going to be really solid and what will be a high-flying offense led by the Offensive Player of the Year in Garrett Nussmeier. I think this LSU offense is going to absolutely light up the scoreboard this year and put up a ton of points. Damon Wilson is a really great ad for Missouri. He didn't really work out at Georgia. Some of these players struggle there at the high-profile program, but I think he's a guy that you can plug into the system and be really good for this team. It's not often you land such a highly coveted player out of the portal here in conference, no less. And I think Missouri did a really good job. Eli Drinkwitz adding a great player. He had 3 sacks last year, 2 forced fumbles that he recovered in limited reps here. I think he's going to be really solid. It was a big ad for this team. I believe he had a forced fumble against Texas in one of those games against Texas. So it was a really solid season despite the limited opportunities for him. And then when you look at Dallas Wilson, a true freshman prospect who could really step up and be huge for this Florida offense. I think Florida's going to have a great year this year. He's a really solid in-state ad, 6'3", 210, a 4-star recruit out of high school, the 8th ranked wide receiver in the class of 2025, the 50th player overall, according to 247 Sports. I think he's going to be really good for this team. I think he's going to slot in early on, get a lot of reps, and be a key force for this Florida Gators offense.
Now let's go ahead and move to our all-conference offense. LSU, they got 3 selections here. Nussmeier, Durham, and of course Trey'Dez Green, who was just sensational in the bowl game. He looked absolutely unreal. I think he's going to be focusing more on football full-time this season. That's going to lead, the big dividends being paid there. I think if the Tigers can put, 45 to 50 points per game on the board, which is, certainly possible, right? I know it's a little unrealistic, but that's what they did back in 2019. That's kind of the expectation people have for the Tigers this year. You might see a receiver creep into this first-team all-nomination. It's going to be hard to knock off Ryan Williams or Eugene Wilson. I think Ryan Williams is going to be a more consistent performer, unlike last year where it was really just a couple of amazing highlight reel plays for Williams. Didn't have the production really across the full season. And then Wilson, a forgotten name after being hurt all of last year for the Gators, who also have a couple of selections here. Austin Barber, I think he's one of the best left tackles in the country. It's not getting enough love, Nick. I think Caden Green, Armaj Reed Adams as well at the guard positions are guys that are going to be ultimate standouts this year before going to the NFL.
I think Ryan Williams has to be better this year, and I think he certainly will be better this year. We saw in those first couple of games in Tuscaloosa that he was absolutely lighting it up. Obviously, everyone remembers his iconic performance against Georgia's on the cover of the new college football video game coming out later in the summer in July, I believe. He should be in line for a phenomenal season. I think he can certainly be on the all-conference offense. I look at the 2 backs there, Wisner and Durham. I think both these backs are going to have phenomenal seasons. I think they'll both be the key parts of their offense on the ground. Garrett Nussmeier, phenomenal quarterback, should have a phenomenal season. This LSU offense should score a ton of points. Trey'Dez Green's such a fun player to watch, and he's a guy that could really do a whole lot this year. The O-line, I like a lot of the pieces there. We kind of split it up here, a bunch of different schools 5 different schools represented on the offensive line, trying to spread out the wealth a little bit here. Caden Green's a phenomenal asset from Missouri, who I think is going to have a really strong season. Connor Liu should take a huge step and be a big focal point of that Auburn offensive line here. Tried to spread it out a little bit, try to put some different faces into this all-conference offense, but a very well-rounded front offensive unit here, in my opinion.
Now I move to the all-SEC defense. Obviously, this is what it was very fun to do because this is just such a talent-rich, part of this conference. You look at the defensive line, Caleb Banks for Florida, Colin Simmons. I think those are two guys that are going to be focal points for their team. Dominic Williams. I don't know how elite of a standout he'll be because it's such a crowded room for OU, but he's going to be a starter, and he's been great his entire career against the run, so I think he'll get his nomination this fall. Sunterrain Perkins, he's got that versatility defensive end linebacker. He's such a great producer for Ole Miss. He's going to put up a bunch of numbers. Look at the safeties, Nick. KJ Bolden, he could have been the breakout player of the year on defense, but I think that was kind of a given. He played about 400 snaps last year, and he was tremendous as an X5 star. Bolden and Hubbard are both, as relatively young players, going to get first-team nominations from me. Ashton Stamps didn't have a pick last year, but he had 14 pass breakups for LSU. Jalen Kilgore is also incredibly underrated. Biggest controversy here I want you to kind of settle, Nick, is linebacker. I went with Whit Weeks and Deontay Lawson over guys like Teron York and CJ Allen. This is a very stacked conference, of course, on defense, but especially at linebacker. Anthony Hill won't be unseated, but the other two guys, I think those are certainly up for debate.
I think if you wanted to make a case here, Teron York over Deontay Lawson would be a very good case to make. I think York is a phenomenal player who had a really good season last year for Texas A&M and is a great leader in that locker room. If you want to make a case for that, I think you can certainly make that case, and I'd be willing to hear that case out. I think Deontay Lawson, though, fits in there really solid right now as well. I think both these two linebackers are two key assets. I think Whit Weeks really deserved his spot as well, so I'm not going to really fight over that one. Maybe if you want to make a case there, York led his team in tackles, 82 total tackles last year, 10 tackles for loss. Well, Deontay Lawson was equally as a key asset for his Alabama team last year, playing a lot of really good football in Kalen DeBoer's first season for that team. He was the number 2 tackler on that team, 76 total tackles for him, 7 tackles for loss. I'm expecting Lawson to have a bigger season than York. I think he'll play a bigger role in this Alabama defense that's looking for some key leadership here. So Lawson gets the nod on the all-conference defense list. I think he'll just play a slightly better here, but both linebackers are certainly deserving, and York deserves a mention as we kind of go over this.
Then a quick question: do you think I should have had Michael Taff over Bolden or Hubbard?
I think Michael Taft certainly could get in the looks here, but I think you made a good move here going with Bolden and Hubbard. I think those are two really solid players. I think Hubbard's gonna have a phenomenal season. I think Bolden just is a really great young player who Kirby Smart will mold into his next dominant defensive piece. I like those two players as a selection there.
Now moving to our 2025 SEC standings predictions. Of course, again, we've already talked about these teams incredibly in-depth, so you can go to those videos if you're looking for a full roster breakdown. We'll just focus on a couple of questions we have for each team. It's probably the biggest topic to discuss. Starting with Georgia, will the Dogs get back to overwhelming dominance in the trenches? This is something that they struggled with immensely last year, as they couldn't run the football. They weren't able to top 200 yards against anybody other than UMass, whatever. This is an offensive line that has incredible size. You have two very stout guards, I think, in Micah Morris and Daniel Calhoun is going to be joining the fold. I think their tackle positions are going to be in a little better standing this year. Monroe Freeling at left tackle, I think, is going to provide a big boost. And, Georgia, Nick, we talked about this last year. We thought their tackles would be weak. We thought their defensive line on the interior would take a bit of a step back. And that's what ended up happening, right? And it still got them to Atlanta. They won that game, and, they almost knocked off Notre Dame as well, and they probably would have made a good run in the playoff. But for Georgia to really get back to where they want to be, they have to get back to being, well-established in the trenches. I point to guys like Christian Miller, Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod, Nazir Johnson. Nobody here is screaming, first-round NFL talent off the board. Of course, all these guys coming out of high school were 4 and 5 stars. You throw in a couple guys like Isaiah Gibson, Elijah Griffin into the fold. The edge presence isn't all that healthy for Georgia, and the interior D-line has some guys who are unproven other than Christian Miller. Georgia has to get back to being overwhelming up front, Nick, and I expect they will, and that's why I have them winning the conference. That's not the only problem with them, though. This Georgia team, despite winning the SEC, had so many flaws, Nick, and I think that's why I'm so high on them, is because you're going to get back to seeing them dominate in all regards, and it's going to start in the trenches.
I think this Georgia team will get back to a high level of football that we've expected under Kirby Smart. I have them making the conference title game, but losing to the Texas Longhorns. This is a team last year, right? Obviously, a good season, winning the conference, going to the college football playoff, but losing to Notre Dame was a bit disappointing if you're a Georgia fan. It's not what you expected, and it's certainly not what Kirby Smart expected. I think I'll take a look at the defensive side of the ball first. This is a side of the ball that has to be just better, and they set a high bar for themselves, right? It's a really high standard they've set for themselves. But they got to find a way to meet that standard this year. I think they have a really good unit here here, obviously, because all these guys are former 5-stars, but they have to find a way to reach that high potential. Nazir Johnson's a guy that I think could certainly break out, but I want to see more out of him. Jordan Hall, another player I'm looking at nose tackle. Can he find a way to step up and be big for this team? Kristen Miller, he has to be strong as a leader, a redshirt junior. He's been around the program for a while. They added Mendoza from Army, a really interesting add late in the portal cycle. Can he be a key asset? Is he going to be able to adjust to the pace of play in the SEC? That's something you want to keep an eye on. He's going to be trying to come off the edge, playing in that hybrid jack position. Gabe Harris, he's coming off the edge as well. He's going to be a key player. Can he be a stronger asset as a junior who's been around this program for a while? On the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line was weaker than it was expected last year, had some issues, and they weren't really able to run the ball. This is a weaker running back room. Nate Frazier is going to have to find a way to take a bulk of the carries and step up and be strong for this team, but he's a young player. Josh McCray was a solid add of the portal, and Roderick Robinson returns, but this is a running back room that I still don't feel super confident with. I think they're going to find a way to step up as season goes on, but I have low expectations for this running back room. They got to play strong, aggressive football on the ground to balance out the passing attack, to give their young quarterback Gunnar Stockton some opportunities to be comfortable and find his throwing lanes. Got to be better on the defensive side of the ball. Got to be better on the offensive side of the ball in the trenches as well if this Georgia team has dreams of going to the national title game.
Now let's look at LSU. The question I came up with them was, do they have the defensive line to really compete in this conference and, really run the table? And, I thought they were very solid last year, but the reason I say that is, at times last 2 years we talked about how they really struggled to defend the boundary with their linebackers not being as athletic as they probably should to defend the dual threat nature of quarterbacks. Nick, we thought Milroe was going to have a field day against them, and that's exactly what they did. It was a complete beatdown. In a home game, they're in Baton Rouge. They had no answer for him. The week earlier, Marcel Reed in that versatile rushing attack was tough. And, of course, they struggled against South Carolina early on in the year. And that's the biggest challenge with them. If they want to go far, they're going to face plenty of dual-threat quarterbacks, guys who have versatility, who can really tear them apart. And, I think the best way to probably solve that is to get more interior pressure, and that's the issue I might have with them, is it's a relatively unproven interior defensive line. It's quite young. You have two true sophomores, Don McKinley, Ahmad Brooks. Of course, these guys were high-end recruits. Jacobian Gilroy is a veteran who's coming back. Sadir Mitchell transfers over from Texas. He's got plenty of size as well. I love what they did in the edge department. Shaq Pyburn, Patrick Payton, Jamari Butler. I mean, this is pretty nasty stuff right here. If people aren't aware, we love this trio of pass rushers they picked up. What role will Harold Perkins have is certainly something you want to discuss as well. But I would like to see them get more interior pressure, Nick. I think that can help against the run. It's going to allow these edges to, be more free-flowing towards the boundary. And I think overall it could allow them to, catapult up the rankings in terms of run defense and when it comes to sacks.
From one SEC title contender to another, they seem to have the same issue, LSU and Georgia. Certainly the same issue on the defensive side of the ball. Can these two programs find a way to be aggressive against the run and aggressive against the pass, putting pressure on opposing offenses? Last year, Alabama was able to have a field day against LSU as this pass rush was unable to do anything against the Crimson Tide, and what was ultimately a very embarrassing blowout loss. This is a young unit. Dominic McKinley, Ahmad Brar are two sophomores that are going to get started. Gabriel Riley Ford's a sophomore as well. True sophomores, that is. That's three true sophomores you're relying on in the interior. Certainly a very dangerous game to play. I like what they did in the portal, right? They addressed the need with two key adds. I'll start with Patrick Payton, who I think was a phenomenal add. Payton didn't have a great season at Florida State last year, but then again, who had a great season on that team? No one did, right? So I think you can give him a mulligan. He was still putting great effort in. 35 total tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. He had 15 tackles for loss the year before that and 7 sacks, 7 QB hurries in 2023. I'm expecting Payton to have similar performance this year and be a strong player for this LSU team coming off that right side. Could be a gem of an ad from the portal. Jack Pyburn was a good ad from Florida as well. He had really good moments for that team. 60 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack. He needs to improve on his pass rush moves a little bit. I think he's got to work on his footwork and his hands a little bit. But outside of that, I think he's a really good, aggressive player coming off the edge. I like this unit a lot. I think this is a really good defensive line. Sure, it's young and inexperienced, but I think they went out, addressed the needs, added really 2 guys there. Jamari Butler was a solid add as well for rotational depth on the defensive line. Is this unit going to be strong enough to go for a national title to balance out that offense? That's what's yet to be seen, but this is a unit that certainly has the potential to reach that high level here. This offense should be high-flying and phenomenal, should really put up a ton of points. If the defense can hold up, this team could find themselves making a deep playoff run.
One point I want to make about Patrick Payton is 2 years ago when Georgia crushed them in the Orange Bowl because no starters played. One starter did play, and that was Patrick Payton. You know what he did? He forced a fumble on the first drive. A lot of people said that Florida State wouldn't have been able to compete at full strength, and I think that one play kind of puts that to rest. I know it's just one play and whatnot, but that was the great argument I made, Nick, because that's how good of a player Payton was 2 years ago, and I think that's also some respect to that Florida State team as well, because no starters played in that game. He was the only one that did, and he made an impact play right away.
massive respect to him for that, right? That's a guy you want in your locker room. He went out there and said, look, my whole team quit, but I'm going to go out there and play and do something one more for the fans. Patrick Payton's a great player, a really good locker room guy, a very aggressive athlete, and a solid asset on your defensive line. A great ad for LSU, and could be the ad that gets him in the conference title game and further in the college football playoff.
Now let's move to Texas, and first I want to address my tiebreaker because I have three guys at 7-1. I picked Georgia to lose to Florida and Jacksonville, Nick, but I have Georgia beating Texas, giving them the nod there. And then LSU also beats Florida, and the calculations I came to had LSU over Texas. Can't remember the exact formula because, there's like 5 or 6 different ones you have to go through. But I came to LSU getting the nod over them, so that explains that tiebreaker real quick. When it comes to the Longhorns, right, it's hard to find something you don't like with this team. I give it an A+. Defense, Arch Manning's now your quarterback. A lot to love, right? But the one thing I don't love is all the youth movement on this side of the ball, especially with some of their toughest games coming on the road, Nick, at Georgia, Florida, and Ohio State. You could quickly see things crumble for them, and it could happen in a quick and bad way if Arch Manning doesn't get some help or, he struggles himself. I think Arch is going to be tremendous. We were impressed with what we saw in a couple of games last year. I think he's built for the moment. Top-rated recruit. I think the run game is going to do work with a very deep backfield. But the offensive line has 3 new guys on there, relatively inexperienced. Now, Trevor Gooseby at times got experience last year in relief, but he's going to be a full-time starter at left tackle now. Ryan Wingo, he's your top receiver. He's just a true sophomore, and I think he's going to be an elite player as well. Everyone around him, though, incredibly young. Nothing but freshmen, redshirt freshmen. You have a junior in DeAndre Moore who made a lot of mistakes last year, just seemed to cost this football team time and time again. I expect him to be, a guy you can lean on more this year. But across the board, this is a lot of inexperience, especially with the guys Arch Manning's throwing to, Nick. I don't know if you're going to be able to just lean on the run game in every occurrence when you're on the road. So the youth movement could certainly bother them, especially week 1 against Ohio State. You're destined to see some mistakes made. That's the only concern I really have with Texas is all this youth trying to come together at once.
It's hard to find an issue with the team that I picked to win the conference this year. I have a couple different results here and there, which is why my tiebreaker, it's certainly not necessary for me to have like a tiebreaker, because I have a couple different things that go in my way to make it so that Georgia has only 1 loss by the time this is all said and done. Texas only has 1 loss, and their 1 loss came out of conference, and then Georgia gets over in the tiebreaker over LSU, who have one more loss for me than they do for you. So that's sort of how it sorts out for my side of the puzzle here. But I have Texas going to the conference title game and winning it, getting revenge for last year. What was a great game they played in Atlanta. This is a big opportunity for Texas, right? This team is phenomenal. I'm not even going to touch on the defense. The defense is just so good and perfect, in my opinion. Really the best defense in the SEC and certainly one of the best in the country. A phenomenal unit. When you look at the offense, I don't worry about the running back room, right? A really good running back room with Trey Wisner and CJ Baxter. Don't have any issues with that. I think Arch Manning is the real deal. I've been banging the drum for him since he was in high school. I'm not buying into he's just the name, hyping him up. He played low-level high school football. He's overrated, this, that, and the other. No, I think he's the real deal. Everything I've seen from him tells me he's the real deal. I feel pretty confident that he will be a star at the next level and will be a star at this level, getting his opportunity to do so right now. I worry about the wide receiver room. It's a young unit. Ryan Wingo, they're going to put a lot of pressure on him as a true sophomore. He had a really good season last year, but he's going to have to step up and be a big part. Parker Livingstone, is he going to find a way to kind of break through and make that next step? He's a player that they want to rely on a lot here. DeAndre Moore, probably your veteran of the group, but he didn't have a great season at times last year. He's going to get a lot of targets. Aaron Butler will get a lot of targets for this team as well. But that's a very shallow wide receiving room. If these guys make mistakes early on in hostile environments, making drops, not running the right routes, things could certainly unravel for this offense, and the defense will have to win a lot of close games, which I think the defense is certainly capable of. I just worry about the offensive production. I don't know if this team will be able to score as many points as some people expect them to. I think they're just going to be a little handcuffed with the youth and experience, but hopefully by the time the full season wraps around, they get to the postseason, the offense will have enough experience to compete with those top teams in the SEC and in the college football playoff.
Now let's move to the Alabama Crimson Tide. I have them at 9-3 this fall. And Nick, as a Bama fan, I gave you a lot of friendly banter at times throughout the year, but I was also being, not so playful when I would say I don't know what their identity is. And that's the question. What will their ID be this fall? Because last year I would tell you they can't throw the ball, can't run the ball, can't pass block, can't run block, can't stop the run. The secondary was actually pretty good, but there was a 3-game stretch there early in the year. Georgia, Vandy, and South Carolina, where we couldn't defend a turtle, it seemed like. And the rest of the year, they played quite sound. But I just didn't know what the identity of this football team was. QB run, is that it? I mean, it was hard to find consistency with this football team in one specific category, again, other than defending the pass. And I think for Alabama, they need to find that badly this year. You have Ty Simpson stepping in Gurmy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, Ryan Williams. That's a nice trio, right? I think Jam Miller is a pretty respectable running back. I think the offensive line has plenty of talent and size. Other than the right tackle position, there's not much to be concerned with there. DeBoer, I think, is going to do good wonders with this offense. I think it'll be levels above what it was last season, especially with Ryan Grubb coming over. They need to be better against the run, need to, to rush the passer better. The identity was very weak with Alabama last year, Nick. What do you think it's going to be this fall?
I think the identity will certainly come around here. I think DeBoer will be more confident in his second season. Obviously, filling the shoes of Nick Saban was always going to be a tough ask, and I think last year was certainly a disappointment by Alabama standards, but they still won 9 games, which I think is a really good number there, and they were still really dominant against some of those tougher opponents. They beat Georgia, they beat LSU. Obviously, the losses against Vanderbilt and Oklahoma continue to sting me and keep me up at night as an Alabama fan and alumnus of the university, but I think this is a team that can go forward and figure things out. The defense, I'm very confident with the defense. I love the secondary. They return a lot of talented guys. I think the defensive line is a really strong unit. I think the linebacking core has some really good players led by Justin Jefferson and Deontay Lawson, who are really strong assets for this team. The offense is where you kind of have your question marks, right? New setup here. Bringing in Ryan Grubb, I think, will be phenomenal. Of course, Grubb was supposed to be the offensive coordinator before he bolted for the NFL before the spring practice season. They ended up plugging in an offensive coordinator who I just did not think was ready to call plays at that level. Nick Sheridan, that is. He's still on the staff, though, so they didn't kick him out. I think it's good that they still have him on the staff. I love the defensive coordinator, Kane Womack, by the way. He had a phenomenal season, and the defense got better as the season went on. Really happy with that. I think Womack's doing a phenomenal job. When I look at the offense, I think Grubb's going to be able to really work with Ty Simpson here. I think Ty Simpson, he's been around the program for a while, knows the playbook. I'm quietly confident in what Ty Simpson can do. This is his offense now. It seems like everything I'm hearing from the people in Tuscaloosa that I know that are still working in the media down there, they're saying that this is Ty Simpson's job, and he's going to take it and run with it. I think he's a very accurate passer. I think he stands up strong in the pocket. I think he'll be able to run the ball up a little bit as well. Obviously not going to be the same type of running as Milroe, but I think he has the legs to make things happen if he needs to be. Maybe that's not something you rely on. Just another trick you have up your sleeve. I like this wide receiver room a lot. I think Horton was a phenomenal add from Miami, a guy that's got a lot of high upside. It could be a really solid wide receiver X. Jeremy Bernard looked better as the season went on. Ryan Williams obviously has that sky-high potential. Don't really need to hold on to that for much longer. Cole Adams is going to be hopefully fully healthy and solid for this team. Jam Miller is a great back. I think Richard Young really showed that he could be a solid back in the future as well as a younger back. And Dre Washington was a really solid add from Louisiana. I think he could be a back that can get involved, certainly being a really good, reliable third down back. I worry about the O-line in some portions. I certainly think the right tackle position is questionable at best. Wilkin Formby just did not look good last year. The left side I feel really good about. I think Cam Dewberry was a solid add out of the portal, and center Parker Brailsford should be one of the best players in the conference come the end of the season. Alabama's identity I think is going to be they're going to have good balance running the ball and throwing the ball. I think Ty Simpson will be a more traditional pocket passer like you've seen in the past in previous Alabama systems. I think Grubb's system going to cater to his specialty and cater to what he needs as a passer. They're going to shelter him a little bit, make sure he's protected, and they'll be able to score a lot of points this year and be really strong on defense. I think Alabama will have a great season and push for a playoff spot.
Yeah, a lot of what you just said is what I said last year, though. They're great at this spot. They got great players in this area. Think they can do this and that. Good coaches, and they just were unable to deliver. Year one jitters, though, I think is something that's got to be noted a little bit, and I think moving forward we'll start to see if this is the right fit. And I think it certainly will be for DeBoer and crew because he's recruiting at a high level right now. Still a very talented roster, so we'll see if they can deliver. Looking at Florida at 9-3. 3 consecutive years, Nick, I've gotten Florida's prediction correct when it comes to their win-loss record. I went with 9-3 to gun for 4 straight, and that's why my biggest question is how nervous are you in the Gators failing to take another step forward? And because as much hype as this team has, the schedule really is very difficult. At LSU, at Miami, Texas, that's a 3-game stretch there early on in the season. Back after the year gets a little easier. You have Georgia and Jacksonville, again, a game I picked for them. Late in the year, they get Tennessee. They should be able to knock them off as well. The road games are quite favorable in the back half of the season. I think for Florida, though, I'm nervous that they can't take the next step forward, and I know it's probably just because of the schedule. But at the same time, you've seen them last year come out of the gates very sluggish. Can DJ Lagway continue to develop in those areas to become a field general, not just a guy who can air it out and make big plays through the air? That's all you saw from him last year. He's going to have to develop very quickly. The run game, I think, showcased good balance, but you're going to be playing some tough teams on the road. You're going to have to be able to throw the football. And then this defense, they were dramatically improved compared to where they were in September. I've seen them really struggle, though, when it came to blitzing. They would get burned a lot. Poor coverage busts, poor positioning from players. And that's been a problem under Billy Napier for a couple of seasons now. I thought it was much better. They played good against Tennessee, against Georgia. Pretty much everybody they played sound defense against late in the season, Nick, after September. If you put that to bed, that first month of the year and you throw it away, right? And you look at how they played over the remainder of the season. This was probably one of the topper teams in the country, and they should have beat the Volunteers, quite frankly. Love what they have in guys like Caleb Banks, Tyreek Sapp. The middle of the defense at linebacker is kind of concerning. If the secondary can't stay healthy, that can become a concern as well. So as much hype as we have on Florida and as great as I think they'll be, elite offensive line, right? I gave this offense an A+ with all the weapons and whatnot. They can be really damn good, Nick, but I'm really nervous that they're going to have some slip-ups potentially because these are tough games and all it takes is one or two mistakes and this team's going to be free-falling.
Sometimes I have to give credit where it is due to my co-host here. You've nailed this Florida team multiple years in a row, and last year might be your most impressive feat yet. This team, most people had them at 5-7, 4-8, and Napier for dead based off that schedule, and you can't blame them. That was a brutally tough schedule last year, but they found a way to win 7 games, go to a bowl game. They also won the Gasparilla Bowl against a depleted Tulane team, I believe. So there you go, right? Credit where credit is due. This is a great call by you, and I think this is a big roll of the dice here at 9-3. This is a Florida team that I think is a really good team, but I'm not sure I can get to 9-3. I'm closer to 8-4 again, or maybe 7-5. But this is a team that's very talented. DJ Lagway, a complete boomer, extreme boom opportunity for him. He's a phenomenal player that could really do a lot for this offense. Great legs, great arm, but a young player being thrust into the fire again this year. Can he take that next step forward? I think he certainly can. He's a phenomenal athlete, a really solid arm, good accuracy as well. Looking to see what type of step he can take. Jaden Ball, another true sophomore running back like Caden Durham, who I think will have a phenomenal season. Ball is a really good back who has really good field vision, nice speed, solid in the backfield, but he's going to be relied on a lot this year. I think the wide receiver room is really good. Eugene Wilson should be a phenomenal, one of the best wide receivers in the conference. J. Michael Sturdivant is a really good add. I know he didn't have a great season last year, but he's a veteran player who's been around the game for a while. I think Dallas Wilson's one of my breakout players. He's a younger player who will certainly be involved at wide receiver X position. TJ Abrams and Tank Hawkins are two younger players who will get reps for this offense as well. The O-line is really solid. When you look at the defense, they return a lot of good guys on the defensive line and in the secondary. The linebacking core is solid with a bit of a younger spin. Miles Graham's a player I'm highlighting as a potential breakout player as a younger player as well. Grayson Howard was solid for them last year. Tyreek Sapp is a really good player. George Gums is a very talented player that's going to put a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. I like the secondary here. The schedule is tough, right? The schedule is always going to be tough for Florida, but they play in a really good home environment. I think they'll win a lot of their home games this year. They'll be really strong at home. I think Napier's a great coach. I think they need to give him some time. He's starting to build and develop something here. This Florida team, I think, is a really good team. They have a really big opportunity here to make that huge step forward. It's a gamble, and I certainly think that it's one of those more risks you're going to take in the conference this year, picking this team to win 8 or 9 games. But this is a good roster with great coaching that can really step up and be a strong team in the conference this year.
Now we move to the Tennessee Volunteers, 9-3 for me. The question I have for them is, how long will the stench of losing Nico last on this team in Knoxville? And of course, maybe it's already gone. It didn't last long at all. But I can imagine a world, Nick, where early on in the season, we'll talk about the offense here in a second, because I think the defense is still great. Guys like Joshua Josephs, they have a great cornerback duo, Ricky Gibson, Jermod McCoy. They get both their linebackers back. 8 starters coming back from what was an elite defense last year. I can imagine a world where this offense early on in the season struggles against Syracuse, week 3 against Georgia, maybe on the road at Mississippi State they have some issues. And they're just going to be, pouting down on themselves, thinking, man, why is this happening to us? Of course this is happening to us. Our quarterback left us here in this position. So, of course, the confidence might be lacking. No knock on Joey Aguilar. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. Does have a bit of a turnover problem to clean up. He's also being forced into a tough situation where I think he might feel some of that doubt as well. Like, man, they're going to be looking at me, down on me. I was put in this tough position. You know what I mean? They're just going to get down on themselves very quickly and be in that kind of pouty, rainy, cloudy mood. And I think that's kind of what the question is for me, Nick, is will that stench wear off? And again, it could already be gone, but I can imagine that world where early on in the season, the offense struggles, and that's the feeling.
I think that's certainly possible, right? This is the story of the season and the offseason, certainly for this Tennessee Volunteers team. When you look at this roster, they lost Nico, and that's certainly a big loss for them. He's such a talented player, but he moves on. The whole NIL dispute was a phenomenal thing to watch from the sidelines. It really was surprising and unexpected, but maybe Tennessee will be better off in the long run. You get rid of that, locker room guy who just really wasn't that great of a fit, it feels like. And yes, short term is going to be a problem here. I think this is certainly a Tennessee team that's a little bit capped this year on offense with Joey Aguilar at quarterback. I think he's a good player, but he had a lot of bad turnovers at App State last year and can certainly be an issue. If this team's going to win a lot of games this year, it's going to be because the defense just bails them out in such a strong unit. I love what the defense can do. Dominic Bailey's a phenomenal player. Jackson Maui in the middle there is a really solid player. Bryson Easton is another great player in the middle. Jeremiah Taylender is a phenomenal linebacker, as is Arion Carter. besides him. Jermon McCoy is a great player at secondary, as is Ricky Gibson. Two phenomenal quarterbacks in McCoy and Gibson. The safety unit, maybe is a little bit weaker there, but I think Andre Turrentine is a phenomenal asset. Will continue to step up. I trust the coaching there. Josh Heupel's done a phenomenal job. He's got a great coaching staff surrounding him as well. They might struggle on offense in those early games. I certainly think the game against Syracuse, they'll struggle on offense. Some of those other opponents he rattled off there in the beginning of the season. And I think, some Tennessee fans are already kind of throwing in the towel and saying, hey, this is a lost season. We'll reload and get back to it next year, which, is a bit of a negative attitude. I don't think it's that lost of a season. It's certainly a season where maybe this team won't be competing for a college football playoff early on. They'll kind of fall behind in that race, but this is still a talented defense and a good running back room here, even if they lost some of the talented players from last year. The offensive line should be solid as well for this team. I'm curious to see what the Vols look like this year. They're the biggest wild card in the conference, in my opinion. They could find a way to really put this together and band as a group and go on and run for a crazy run and push themselves towards a playoff spot, or they completely fall apart and find themselves in a tough position in what could be considered a rebuilding year if it doesn't go well. Certainly keeping my eye on the Vols as the season goes on.
And before we move to the rest of the standings, Nick, which of these teams do you have in the playoffs? Me personally, I went with 3. I put Texas, LSU, and Georgia in the CFB. Who are you rocking with?
I have Texas, Georgia, and Alabama in the CFB. I think all those teams will make it in there. I think LSU will certainly be in contention as well. I'm toying with maybe them getting in. I'm going to continue to tinker with it as this offseason goes on. But right now, I have Bama, Texas, and Georgia in the college football playoff.
And moving to our next slide here, we'll just focus on the teams on the left to get things started. The ones that, are kind of around the middle of the pack, but also have enough upside to potentially run the table themselves. You start with Auburn. I think Jackson Arnold was a phenomenal addition in the portal. I think he's going to do wonders for this offense. They're going to be better up front. The pass-catching group is unreal. Eric Singleton coming over from GT is great. Malcolm Simmons, Cam Coleman. I mean, that's an unreal trio, I think, when it comes to throwing the football. They played pretty sound defense last year as well. I did pick them to beat Alabama in the season finale. Look at Ole Miss, a team that loses a lot on defense. They have a head coach who's a complete loudmouth, but he did have a great year in the portal. I love what they did at wide receiver. Guys like Harrison Wallace, Dejon Stribling are coming over. I think Austin Simmons, despite being incredibly young, has some nice, impressive traits. I loved what he did against Georgia in relief. Of course, Caden Lee was my breakout player of the year in the conference. Offensive line needs to be better, though. Need to be able to run the ball more consistently, especially with this young quarterback. And I think the defensive line is probably going to take a massive step back due to immense losses they have up front. I think we'll miss, though, at 9-3. It's a pretty respectable mark. Texas A&M, Nick, we did them just the other night. Love the offensive line. I thought he was the best in the conference. The running back room's incredibly deep as well. Ruben Owens is back and fully healthy. Will Le'Veon Moss be healthy after his leg injury? Remains to be seen. Marcel Reed, I think if the passing attack can really take that next step and he can be a legitimate dual threat, they might be able to win the conference. But same old story of Texas A&M. Love Mike Elko. Oklahoma, it's our biggest sleeper. I'll go ahead and skip them for a second so we can talk more extensively in a moment. Missouri, a bit of a lowly season at 7-5. Biggest argument I really make for that, Nick, I know it's maybe a bit of an amateur response, but if you played as poor as they did last year throughout the year with the roster they had, I don't really see how you're going to have much success this year. Ahmad Hardy was a great addition, as was Kevin Coleman. I think Bayou Perbola at quarterback. This is a very fun offense, I think, to watch for Missouri. Defense was abysmal in the secondary. Don't know how good they're going to be in the front seven, so I think the Tigers are probably going to struggle a good bit this year. What do you make of these teams here, minus Oklahoma?
And this is certainly, when you look at these teams, there's a lot of interesting storylines here. Some, fans of Auburn and Ole Miss might be mad that we have Tennessee ranked a little bit higher than them, and Tennessee gets the jump to the best of the SEC slide, while the two other programs are stuck on the rest of them slide, which is a place you kind of want to get out of if you consider yourself a top-tier contender. But I think there's good reasons why both these teams, slot a little bit lower. We'll start with Auburn, right? I think Hugh Freeze is doing a really good job. I think he's got his quarterback potentially finally with some works that they've done in the portal. I think they've really brought in a great quarterback in Jackson Arnold who can really be solid for this team and elevate and be a great star for them. I like what that wide receiver has, right? Cam Coleman and all the other guys there are just phenomenal athletes. Perry Thompson and the rest of them, just a really great deep unit. I worry about the rushing attack. I think it's certainly going to take a step back. The offensive line should be really solid this year. The defensive unit is really good for Auburn as well. Is the coaching going to be ready to get this job done? This is a team that plays really well at home, and they have some nice favorable home games this year, playing UGA and Alabama down there on the Plains. Tough trip for Alabama every single time they have to go down to Jordan-Hare Stadium, a very vaunted place to play as an Alabama fan. I hate playing down there. This Auburn team, they can certainly push for the playoffs, right? This is a team that's very talented, has a really deep roster across the board, but I just don't know if they're ready to take that next step yet. And if they have another bad season, Hugh Freeze might find themselves in a little bit of trouble and getting some pressure from those fans and the boosters. Ole Miss is another team that's in a similar boat. Kiffin, a very loud mouth, does a lot of yapping, but just cannot seem to get the full results on the field. This is a team that's putting a new quarterback in there. I think Austin Simmons is a really solid quarterback who can step up and be good for this team, but I still have question marks about this team. They seem to fold against some of those weaker opponents, which I think that will happen again this year for Ole Miss. I don't know if I trust Kiffin to get the job done. I just don't think his coaching is good enough. This is a great defense. They added some great pieces out of the portal, a really good offense as well with some solid adds, but still just feels like this team is not ready to compete for a college football playoff spot. I think they're going to have a couple weaknesses on this roster that will hold them back. Texas A&M, unfortunately, feels like the same old story for them. I like some of the work they did as well. I think they have a really solid quarterback that can lead the way for them at this moment in time, and Marcel Reed, who's just a really good dual threat player that's got great legs, a really solid arm, and will sort of develop and be more comfortable this season. But this is a team that I think is just a little bit weak at pass catcher. The running back room is very deep. I think they're going to be able to run the ball very effectively. But I just think this is another team that's going to be continuing to struggle with old habits and unable to get over the top and beat those tough teams. As for Missouri, this is a team that's getting a lot of interesting discourse on social media. Some people feel fans are too harsh and hate on them too much and not giving this team enough credit. I do give Eli Drinkwitz some credit. He's recruited really strong, added some great assets in the portal year in, year out, like my breakout player in Damon Wilson, who I think could be really solid for this team and plug in well on the defensive line. Bayo Perbola, I think, was a really good add from Penn State, who showed me in the limited appearances last year that he could be really solid as a starter in the conference. I think they just lose too much talent at wide receiver, and I think they have too many question marks at running back as well to really be a contending team in the SEC. They folded in some of those tougher road games last year and had no pulse against Alabama, a team that Alabama underperformed last year. This is a team that I think the defense will be really solid, but I have questions about the offense. I don't know if the transition for the offense will be just as good as it needs to be competing at tough conference, so they kind of slumped down there to 7-5, but still a lot of high upside potential for the Missouri Tigers.
Now let's talk about Oklahoma, the biggest sleeper for both of us, 8-4 for me. I love the hype. I love what this team can accomplish this year. I think they could even win 10 to 12 games this season. Of course, last year we expected their offense to not be that great, and they were even worse than we thought. And it's because the top 7 receivers, they all were pretty much hurt the entire season. The offensive line I knew would be bad. I didn't think they'd be dead last in terms of sacks allowed. So it was just a whole, skirmish of everything that could go wrong for Oklahoma went wrong. And what do they have now? John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle, his offensive coordinator, come over. Absolutely love John Mateer. This guy's amazing. Jaden Ott now coming over after a disappointing season. Still a very talented running back, though. Deion Burks, he's going to be fully healthy, joined by a couple of FCS transfers. They added some more depth to the receiving room after all those guys were hurt, and they all decided to leave, too. That was kind of strange. The offense has to figure things out, Nick, and I think they certainly will, but being in the SEC, I'm not just going to assume John Mateer is going to come and throw for 45 touchdowns and run for another 15. So that's where we're going to kind of mask the hype a little bit. While on the other side, I think the defense is amazing. I think this is the best D-line potentially in the country, top 3 at least. R. Mason Thomas will be a breakout superstar. Dominic Williams, of course, leading a deep physical rotation on the interior. They're going to have to figure things out at linebacker. The secondary is going to have to improve and play better. But 2 years ago, they forced like 20, 25 interceptions, something like that. If they can play at that kind of level, this team will be ungodly. And I think guys like Kendall Dolby, Robert Spears-Jennings are going to be tremendous for them. Kendall Daniels, I think, is a big-time transfer addition for this defense, not getting enough love. Everything's primed and ready for Brent Venables to take that next step, Nick. 8-4. I hope it doesn't happen because I want to see this team compete for a playoff opportunity. So I'm going to be, praying I'm wrong on this one, but at the same time, I have to be realistic and mask that hype because there are some legitimate concerns that could certainly bite you in the back.
Everything that went wrong for Oklahoma last year did go wrong. This team was in a really good position last year to enter the conference and have a good first season, but it didn't really work out for Venables and company, and people really questioned his leadership. Everything that went wrong except for the game against Alabama. They ended up losing a game to Navy in the bowl game. When does that really happen when you lose to a service academy like that, right? That should normally be a red flag. But I think this is a new page, a new opportunity for this team. You and I have been talking about their over-under win total being at like 6.5 in a lot of books. I think that's just criminally underrated. This is an Oklahoma team that I think has a lot of high upside, and it starts with John Mateer, who you plug in. Sure, the transition from Wazoo to the SEC is never an easy one, but his offensive coordinator is following him, which I think is certainly a positive thing to have. Mateer's a very accurate quarterback, a really good runner, and really solid as a pocket passer as well. A very aggressive and accurate quarterback who can put it on a pinpoint when he needs to. The offensive line should be a lot better this year, and that was a big liability for them last year. And this offensive line will be stronger. I like what the running back room can do. I think the wide receiver room is solid. The defense has a lot of key great players here and great coaching with Venables. R. Mason Thomas will be a phenomenal player, will be a household name by the time the season is done. Dominic Williams as well will be solid for this team, another really big key asset on the interior. The linebacking core, I think, will find a way to come around as the season goes on, and the secondary is the same deal. The schedule has some tough matchups, but also some favorable win opportunities for them at home, and I think anything can happen at a neutral site against Texas in the Red River Classic, a neutral site in quotations, of course, but close enough to a neutral site. This is an OU team that I think has got sky-high potential for a reason, and a lot of people are sleeping on them. I love the coaching. I love what they have here. I love what they added. I'm really excited for this team. I think they take a huge step forward this year. Playoffs may be a step too high for them, but I certainly think 7-8 wins is very achievable with what this team can do on paper. A great roster here and a schedule, like I said, that's got some manageable games here. A really interesting game against Michigan early on that will certainly set the tone in week 2. But the non-conference outside of that is not too bad. The SEC splits are not horrible for this team either. Not a bad schedule, great coaching, great roster, and a potentially superstar quarterback. I like that recipe there.
Now let's look at the right side of this graphic. Some of the bottom of the barrel teams, Mississippi State. I think they can really improve this year, but their schedule is utterly impossible. I think Blake Shapen will be solid. I think they have a nice head coach as well. And, they did good work in the portal. And they were not punching bags last year. They were like 7-5 against the spread. They were not getting blown out. We even had a bet against them in the Egg Bowl, Nick, the cash with ease. Kentucky at 3-9. They utterly disappointed last year. That was a bet that I had that lost. I had the over. They didn't even come close to hitting that. And now they turn to Zach Calzada to try to pull him out of the dumps against another schedule that's utterly impossible for Kentucky. I do like the running back group they have in Dante Dowdell and Jamarian Wilcox. It's a nice 1-2 punch that I think can maybe terrorize somebody. And I think they'll play some close games and offer a scare or two. 3-9 for me. Vanderbilt back to 4-8 just because I think Diego Pavia is a great player. But I think that the scheme that Vanderbilt ran last year is going to be a little bit more easier to figure out. I think their defense will be good, but I don't know if it's going to be great in this conference. Again, I think Vanderbilt's just hard expectation to expect them to play as good as they did last year. They're also cover machines. Arkansas, with Taylon Green, I think they can compete with anybody on offense. Defense, though, I think they're going to struggle up front. Secondary's going to take a step back. Love what they have in the middle with Steven Dix and Xavier Sori. And then we have South Carolina, who we'll talk about in a moment. Nick, you want to go ahead and address these 4 teams real quick?
Yeah, talk about the bottom 4 teams here. I think each of them have some interesting storylines. Mississippi State, this is a team that's going to be fun to watch this year. I think Jeff Levy's doing a really good job. I think Blake Shapen will be solid at quarterback for this team. I think the wide receiver room has some decent players. The defense, certainly a weaker unit and definitely one of the worst in the conference, if not the worst. But this team played with a lot of heart last year. They were really good against the spread. I think they're a fun team to watch this year for betting purposes. If you're looking for a team to throw some couple bucks on to cover the spread in some of those loftier games against those top SEC teams, I think it's worth taking a punt on Mississippi State this year. I think they're a really fun team to watch. I think they'll continue to show strides, but again, the record will not show that at the end of the season. But I think when you look deep down at this team, they're heading in the right direction. In my opinion, Kentucky is heading in the wrong direction. I think this is another bad season in Lexington for the Wildcats here. Mark Stoops' team is just not going to play very good football. Zach Calzada is just not the answer at quarterback. The defense should be solid at times. The running back room is really good. Dante Dowell is a really solid back, but the wide receiver room is a bunch of guys from other programs that had no success, completely misfits. The offensive line's a weak unit. I think the defense has some question marks, even if it is a good unit. A bad season in Lexington, but I guess there's always basketball season for Wildcats fans. Not that far around the corner of Mark Pope and company building something in that sort of realm. When you look at Vanderbilt, phenomenal season last year, a dream season for Clark Leah and company, but I think it's going to come to a little bit back to reality for this team. It's tough to pick them to go 4-8 after all the success they had last year, winning a bowl game for the first time in a very long time. But I think Pavia will be kind of cracked a little bit here. I think some teams will be able to coach out and scheme against him a little bit better here. The defense has a lot of good returning prospects and really good assets for Vanderbilt's level. The offensive line, I think, is a solid unit, even though they're replacing a lot of different pieces here. And the wide receiver room's got some decent talent, as is the running back room. But I just think Vanderbilt's going to be unable to replicate that magic. They were really effective on third down last year. They were in third and short a lot, which made it so that they had one of the higher rates of converting on third down last year. This year, I think they'll be in a lot more third and long situations, making it tougher for them to convert with the system they run on offense, just making them in a tougher spot. When you look at Arkansas, I think Taylon Green's a great prospect and a great quarterback overall who's got really good legs, really solid accuracy as a passer, but they lose a lot of their weapons at wide receiver. The offensive line should still be a good unit, but it just has not played up to the level that you would hope, considering that Sam Pittman was formerly an offensive line coach at some high-level programs in the conference. The defense is a really solid unit, but again, they just suffer from a tough SEC schedule. Also played Notre Dame at home, which is a really fascinating matchup, and I can't wait to watch that and see what that looks like. Unfortunate for them to go 5-7. I think this roster is really talented. In another conference, they may be a top tier team in that conference, like the Big 12 or the ACC. Just not good enough for the SEC, and 5-7, unfortunately, for the Razorbacks.
Yeah, and Mississippi State, they host Arizona State early on in the year. I think that's a very winnable game for them. I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. And again, it might be an outright W. Looking at South Carolina, Lenore Sellers, I have him third on my quarterbacks list. I think he's a phenomenal player. Love the tape. Great dual threat player. Certainly a lot of upside as well for him. Love what they have in terms of this run scheme, the size in the backfield. They have nice upside when it comes to being, improved in the trenches and in the intermediate downfield passing game due to the weapons they have. How do I have a guy who's top 5 quarterback in the country, Nick, going only 6-6? Well, of course, the schedule is incredibly difficult, right? I know they host Alabama. Maybe that's a game they can snag there to improve this record a little bit. I don't like what they have on the D-line. Dylan Stewart, he's great, but what they did in the portal and who they have coming back, I'm just not all that high on. I think they're really going to struggle to have that overwhelming dominance like they did last year. But the staff is phenomenal. They could probably get them going in the right direction. Love what they have in the middle in Fred Johnson and Justin Okoronkwo. And then I think the secondary is going to be quite respectable as well. I just don't think they're going to be able to generate as much pass rush. They're not going to be elite against the run, Nick. And I think that the run game for South Carolina might take a slight step backwards. I do think they improve across the board at the end of the day. But they play some very tough opponents, man. And I know that the Trojans a couple years ago had the worst defense anyone's ever seen. But if Caleb Williams can go 7-5, it's totally realistic that Lenore Sellers goes 6-6, Nick. I know that's kind of disrespectful, but it's not on him. I think that there's other areas this roster might struggle in with those tough games that causes them to barely make a bowl game. This is obviously a very big boomer bust team, and I love the head coach in Shane Beamer. I just don't think that their defense is really going to bring the same capabilities they did last year.
I said Tennessee was the most interesting team in the offseason and the absolute wild card in this conference. If you want to find the team that's challenging them for that position on my leaderboard, well, it's South Carolina. This is the team's the media darling. A lot of people have this team going to the playoffs this year, and I could certainly see that. The schedule is tough, but this is a roster that's really fascinating, and Shane Beamer's a phenomenal coach. Lenore Sellers is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and a big opportunity for him to be the number 1 overall pick in the draft by the time this is all said and done in 2026 if he plays his cards right. He's a phenomenal player, an incredible athlete, a freak of nature, 2,500 yards passing, 18 touchdowns last year, really good on the ground as well, but it's got to cut down on the turnovers. The 7 interceptions just was too high last year. Has a really good wide receiver room. Nick Harbor is fully committing to football. Curious to see what that looks like for him. Jared Brown, Mateo Bennett were really solid for this team as well. I think Oscar Adaway and Rashul Faison are really solid backs that this team returns. The offensive line's a good unit as well. The defense, definitely a bit of a makeover here. They lost a lot of talented pieces, but some of those guys they brought in will be really good. Damon Clowney is a phenomenal player. They added at the portal. Xavier Hardy could certainly step up. Justin Arakarako is a really solid player from Alabama who I really wanted to see more out of him, but he never got the opportunity to do so. Him and Fred Johnson should be a really good younger linebacking core. Brandon Cisse is a really solid cornerback they added at left cornerback. Judge Collier is a phenomenal cornerback. They have a right cornerback. Jalen Kilgore is such a great asset at nickel back that they'll move around and really get a lot out of him. The schedule is brutal, though, right? This is a schedule that is no joke. They open the season in Atlanta on Sunday night against the Hokies on August 34th. First, that's a tough matchup against the Virginia Tech team that's got a point to prove this year. It certainly cools off, but then you got your absolute murder's row of playing LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas, all in a row, plus a game against Clemson after an easier break against Coastal Carolina. Tough schedule. Your built-in rivalry with Clemson is always going to do that for the South Carolina team. But I like the coaching here. I like this defense, even if there's a bunch of new faces. I think they'll gel together and be really strong. Lenore Sellers is a phenomenal athlete. It's just tough to predict this record for them, right? Because the schedule is so tough, so you kind of have to put them in a little bit of a tougher position here. I gave them one more win than you did. I put them at 7-5, gave them an extra win. I think they'll beat Texas A&M as the one that I differ from you. Certainly a disappointing season for South Carolina fans. They think this team can make the playoff, and I don't blame them considering the success they had at times last year. Just a tough schedule and still some inexperience in the roster at those key positions to get this team over the hump.
Their over-under is 7.5, minus 110 either way, and I think the books are expecting them to go at least 2-1 against OU, Bama, or Clemson. All three of those are home games, Nick. So I can see where the books are leaning. And I certainly wouldn't touch this because I think that 6-6 is certainly disrespectful, and I'll admit that. But that's just the schedule that I see, and unfortunately that's how it is. I think Sellers is phenomenal, though, and I love the coaching, love the roster, all that. It's just how it is sometimes. It's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. A lot here to jam-pack with the SEC. I think they'll get back to being a lot better than they were last year, where they were honestly just very silly and clueless, and they blew a lot of opportunities in the conference as a whole.
A lot of phenomenal opportunities for SEC teams here. A great conference overall. Some really great teams at the top. Your LSU's, your Georgia, your Texas, your Alabama. 4 really good teams at the top of the conference. Some really great teams in the middle as well. Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, Ole Miss. And then even the bottom of the barrel are still some interesting storylines and some really fun teams to watch. I love breaking down this conference. A phenomenal conference here. A great all-conference roster that we put together on the offense and defense. And a really good conference in total here. Excited to see some SEC football this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.